Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. Rick Holden never considered his life particularly remarkable. He simply lived and worked in his coastal town in South Carolina, trying to provide for his family and give his daughter the best. Every day began early for him. He got up before dawn, drank strong black coffee, and went to the workshop located near the embankment. A modest but strong business has long been established. There several boxes for repairing boats and boats, a spare parts warehouse, and a small office. The place wasn't luxurious, but it was functional, and Rick was proud that he had built it all from scratch. The port has always had its own life. The light sound of the surf, the cries of seagulls, and the smell of salt-soaked wood created an atmosphere of calm and a little nostalgia. In the morning, the city was just waking up. Passers-by with mugs of hot coffee, early fishermen hanging gear on their boats, a few tourists who came out to watch the sunrise over the ocean. At this hour, Rick felt most confident. He loved the feeling of a new starting point that every sunrise gives. It seemed to him that if you are ready to work, then everything is in order, everything is going as usual. Two of his employees were already waiting in the workshop, Emmett and Mario, hard-working guys who have long been accustomed to the taciturn nature of their boss. Rick greeted them with a short nod and immediately got down to business, checking the order log, seeing which boats were awaiting repair, what spare parts needed to be ordered. The work progressed, and everyone knew that there would be no unnecessary talk. Rick valued work and clarity. He rarely smiled for no reason, but he took care of his employees. He did not skimp on good tools, paid salaries on time, and was always ready to help if there was an emergency. Around 9 o'clock, Rick usually took a break to call home. He could only say a couple of phrases to Laura, but it became their little tradition. Having learned that everything was fine with her, he spent the rest of the day more calmly. Lately, however, Rick felt that these calls were becoming more and more formal. Laura answered monotonously, as if she was preoccupied with something and sometimes forgot to ask how he was doing. He didn't attach much importance to it. You never know what's on people's minds. There were periods when Laura became thoughtful or irritable, but everything returned to normal if you gave her time. After all, they had been together for over 10 years, had gone through many difficult periods, and each time found a smooth path. After work, Rick tried to stop by the store, buy something for dinner, and sometimes took with him a small souvenir for his beloved daughter, who was only 7 years old. The girl's name was Carly. Mischievous and curious, she saw in her father a hero who knows everything in the world about the seas, sails, and anchors. When Rick entered the house, she instantly ran towards him with an enthusiastic cry, "Dad!" And although Rick's smile could hardly be called wide, quiet happiness was reflected in his eyes every time. He hugged Carly tenderly and patiently listened to her stories about school, about friends, about some imaginary adventures. At such moments, he felt especially proud. For the sake of this baby, he, in fact, built everything he had. For the sake of her well-being, he was ready to work from morning to night. Laura usually met Rick closer to dinner if she was not distracted by household chores. Her blonde hair was neatly gathered, and her gaze was a little distracted. It seemed that she was always in her own thoughts. However, in front of her husband, Laura tried to stay calm. She helped with cooking and sometimes told some news from the local school, where she had previously worked as a teacher. In recent years, she has devoted herself to home and raising her daughter. Friends said that she was cheerful, but Rick knew. Laura did not always have enough communication. She wanted bright emotions and compliments. He himself is a reserved person, so their characters were very different. But as the family believed, opposites complement each other. In general, life went smoothly. No storms, big quarrels, or breakdowns. On weekends, Rick would sometimes take his family on a short walk along the coast. They watched the setting sun turn the ocean into warm colors. Carly ran along the sand and collected shells, trying to find the most unusual ones. Laura seemed tired or distracted at times, But as soon as her daughter put her arm around her, she perked up. And Rick just walked next to them, listening to their laughter, looking at the waves, feeling like he belonged. This calm routine was disrupted when Martha, Rick, and Trevor's mother suddenly arrived. She lived in a small house half an hour from the town, but almost always, when visiting her eldest son, she talked about Trevor. Not even about him, but rather about how he needs help, support, how talented he is, but has not yet found his place. It seemed natural for her to set her youngest son as an example, they say. Trevor has such a character, he is sincere, understands everyone, but Rick is reserved. Martha herself was a capricious woman, moderately strict, but not particularly warm. Most of all, she loved to give advice, even if no one asked for it. I talked to Trevor yesterday. She could begin over lunch. He is now in another city, but he needs a new impetus for development. He's already suffered enough. Rick, think about it. Maybe you have a vacancy in your workshop. The guy is so capable. Rick listened in silence, knowing that any objections would only cause a new wave of reproaches from his mother. He himself was not against helping his brother, but he was not eager to see him too closely. Since childhood, Trevor was distinguished by his ease and charm. He succeeded in everything, but he did not stay anywhere for long. But I didn't want to argue now. At such moments, Laura, feeling the tension, tried to turn the conversation to something everyday, asking Martha about her health or about her summer cottage. Either she wanted to smooth out the corners, or she herself was tired of these endless comparisons. When the mother left, she could leave behind an atmosphere of slight anxiety. This was unusual for Rick, because his everyday life went on without major problems. He is used to solving everything as it comes. We need to repair the boat, we'll get down to business. We need to buy additional materials, we'll place an order. But when it came to family, everything was complicated by understatement. Rick didn't like conflict, didn't like drama. He valued order, peace, and clear things to do, but with his mother and brother, he could never achieve such clarity. Sometimes Rick noticed that after Martha's visit, Laura became even more thoughtful. I was sitting on the veranda with a mug of coffee, looking somewhere towards the sea. He asked her, "Is everything okay?" She nodded and silently shrugged her shoulders. Maybe she was sorry that family relationships were not as warm as she would like. Or perhaps she was worried about something of her own. But in general, life went on as usual, and Rick saw no reason to worry. Sometimes before going to bed, Laura leafed through family albums, which depicted her and Rick's first years of marriage, the birth of their daughter, birthdays, and holidays. He noticed how she sighed softly, touching a photo in which they were both smiling, hugging each other on the ocean. It seemed that she wanted to return something, maybe that carelessness, that enthusiasm that was before. But Rick sincerely believed that everything was fine with them now. Of course, the passion has subsided, but there is a calm attachment, a sense of security, a common future. That was enough for him. He believed that family happiness is not a carnival, but the ability to live side by side, accepting each other's shortcomings. This is how their routine went. Morning workshop, afternoon household chores, evening family dinner. Rick did not like loud events. He believed that harmony lies in small rituals, saying hello to the workers, patting his daughter on the head before bed, asking Laura about what to buy for the store. People who looked into his life from the outside saw a strong man who built a business, provided a home for his family, and spared no effort to maintain this way of life. Some were even jealous. After all, a quiet haven is a rarity in our time, and not everyone has such stability. Trevor showed up early in the morning. Rick was just about to leave for the workshop when the hum of an engine was heard in the yard. His younger brother, ruffled and disheveled, was sitting behind the wheel of an old pickup truck. The first thing Trevor did, with some diligence, parked next to the house, turned off the engine and jumped out, holding a worn suitcase in his hands. "Hello, Rick," he shouted, smiling widely, although fatigue was noticeable in his eyes. "Sorry it's been like this since this morning, but I had to go somewhere urgently." Rick looked at his brother silently for a couple of seconds, assessing his appearance. Trevor has noticeably lost weight, there are dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes are careless. but the smile is still the same, enveloping, inviting. "Hello, Trevor." "Come in," Rick answered dryly and briefly. "Where is Laura?" The younger brother looked around, dragging the suitcase onto the porch. "In the kitchen, preparing breakfast," Rick muttered and opened the door. Laura, hearing the voice, looked out from behind the doorway. When she saw Trevor, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Trevor, how are you? I heard you lost your job. Come in, sit down. I'm just finishing the pancakes, and then the coffee is ready." "Oh, Laura," Trevor dramatically rolled his eyes. "My savior. Because I was exhausted from the road, I really wanted something hot." Rick sighed heavily and took hold of his jacket. "I have to go. The working day is starting. I hope you can figure it out without me." Laura looked at her husband. "Would you like to have breakfast with us? I'll finish everything now, in 5 minutes." Rick simply nodded, but doubt flashed in his eyes. He was not used to such an unexpected intrusion. However, since Trevor is here. Moreover, Martha just called the other day, tearfully begging for help. Poor Trevor, who lost his job. Rick was going to discuss this with Laura anyway, so let it be. At the kitchen table, the smell of pancakes and freshly brewed coffee filled the cozy space. Carly, still sleepy, came out of her room and, seeing her uncle, opened her eyes wide. "Wow, Uncle Trevor, will you live with us?" She seemed happy. She always liked his cheerful uncle, who knew how to joke and tell funny stories. "I hope so, honey, if your dad allows it." Trevor ruffled her hair kindly. "How are you doing?" "Okay," Carly said, sitting down on a chair. "Today there is a matinee at school, and I am learning a poem." "Well done," Trevor approved. "Maybe you can read it in the evening." Rick, sitting opposite, followed the conversation. He saw that his brother was trying to win over everyone without exception, and he succeeds. Even Laura looks at Trevor with slight sympathy, because he, in fact, is now without money, without work, without an apartment. "I was thinking," Rick said carefully, putting down his mug, "it's not the busiest season in my workshop, but maybe we can find something to keep you busy." "Yes?" Trevor perked up. "I don't know much about tools, but I can help with papers or talk with clients." "I'm pretty good at this, right?" "It would be nice for you to start with something simple," Rick chuckled. "Let's see what we can entrust." Laura, giving him another pancake, interjected. "That's a great idea, Trevor." "True, true. Otherwise, I know how hard it is for you to look for work in unfamiliar places. It's better if your family is nearby." Trevor smiled at her gratefully. "Thank you, Laura. I just don't want to sit around doing nothing. Moreover, I'm already tired of living at other people's expense." And Martha kept buzzing her ears, saying, "Rick will help. He's your older brother." Rick just smiled wryly, but remained silent. He didn't like it when his mother so directly decided for him what and how to do. But Laura was apparently pleased that the family was getting closer. She herself poured Trevor's coffee, moved the sugar bowl, and then glanced briefly at her husband. "Rick, if anything, our guest room is quite free. You can put a folding bed there, and that's it." "Okay," he agreed. "Let him stay with us for now. But then he will have to find something permanent." "Thank you, brother." Trevor looked genuinely touched. "I promise I won't stay long and won't be a burden." Rick looked at his watch and stood up. "Well, I have to go. We'll discuss it in more detail this evening." Trevor settled into the guest room. During the day, Laura showed him the whole house, helped him sort out his things, and at the same time told him about local shops and cafes. This was interesting to him, because he had not stayed in his hometown for a long time. After lunch, Rick returned home. He urgently needed to pick up some documents. He found Trevor in the kitchen, standing at the sink, drying dishes, while Laura put the dishes on the shelf. They chatted animatedly. "You should have seen these small restaurants on the coast where I sometimes worked," Laura said. "There is live music there in the evenings, mostly Latin American. So much fun." "Oh, I love Latin," Trevor chuckled. "We'll have to go sometime. Rick is unlikely to come with us, right?" "Yes, he doesn't really like noise," Laura agreed, stirring the sauce on the stove. "But maybe he'll decide in company." At that moment, Rick entered the kitchen. Trevor immediately straightened up and smiled. "Oh, back. Would you like me to help you with the documents?" "No need, I can handle it myself." Rick glanced at Laura, who was a little embarrassed by her husband's unexpected appearance. "Have you settled here yet?" "Yes, everything is fine," Trevor answered. "Laura showed me where everything is, so consider me right at home." Rick nodded silently, trying to understand why this bothered him a little. Perhaps because Trevor always easily fit into someone else's space and found a common language, and Rick had to build his world for years, take care of business, home, family. But there was no point in talking about it now. He said quietly, "I'll just pick up the documents and return to the workshop." Laura just said, "Fine. We'll also go out for a walk soon and show Trevor around." Rick didn't bother to clarify anything. They wouldn't run away from the town anywhere. He only hoped that his brother would really come to his senses, help in the workshop, and soon find a place for himself. But a vague feeling of uneasiness nevertheless slipped through his soul. That evening at dinner, the family of four sat at the table: Rick, Laura, Carly, and Trevor. The girl behaved animatedly, pouring out questions about her uncle's previous work and whether he knew how to repair boats. Trevor answered, exaggerating, embellishing. "No, honey, I was mainly involved in real estate. But it would be cool to learn how to repair boats if you come to visit. I'll show you how to rivet small boats." "Great!" Carly clapped her hands. Rick did not lose sight of the fact that his brother knows how to make an impression, especially on those who are looking for brightness and emotional nourishment. He glanced at Laura. She was smiling, pouring juice for Trevor, clearly relaxed next to such a merry fellow. Rick himself felt a little put off, but his habit of silence took over, and he didn't make a big deal out of the situation. "Tomorrow I'll take you to the workshop for half a day," he told Trevor. "I'll show you what's what. There will be a small batch of boats. You need to do diagnostics and talk to clients." "Great, brother." "I agree to everything." Trevor nodded friendly. "If I can attract new clients, I will be happy." "I doubt it's that fast," Rick snorted, but without obvious malice. "But we'll see." Then dinner smoothly turned into general conversations. Trevor told how he lost his job. His real estate agency closed, supposedly due to the financial crisis, but in fact, apparently due to mismanagement. He was left on the street without a guaranteed income. There were no friends nearby. Everyone was in their own problems. Martha was ready to let him in, but she lived too far from potential opportunities, and Rick lived here in the city itself, where, according to his mother, you can at least get hooked. "I know this is stressing you out, Rick," Trevor breathed gratefully as Carly went to her room. "But believe me, I have no goal of sitting on your neck. Just give me a chance to get back on my feet, okay?" Rick looked at his brother hard. "You always got those chances, Trevor. But I didn't use everything properly." "Yes, I understand, I understand." He rubbed the back of his head, slightly embarrassed. "I really want to change something. I'm already 31. It's time to think about the future." "Well, and Martha, she has a tongue without bones. She blew my mind." Laura put her hand on Trevor's shoulder. "Everything will be fine. We have a peaceful city. There are many opportunities here." Rick winced a little, but remained silent. Yes, Laura, as always, tries to support, and he, it turns out, remains in the role of a stern older brother. But it was like that in childhood. Trevor walked through the world with a smile, and Rick with a frowning forehead. The night passed peacefully. The next morning, Trevor went out with Rick to the workshop. The weather was clear. The sea breeze carried away the smells of salt water. Trevor did not stop talking along the way, bombarding his brother with questions. "Listen, are there many boats being repaired? What breaks more often? And if the boat even falls apart, who pays for it?" Rick answered briefly, sometimes holding back his irritation. He was used to a different dynamic. In the morning, he wanted silence, not endless chatter. But Trevor seemed glad to at least fill the awkward silence. In the workshop, Rick introduced his brother to the employees. "This is Trevor, my younger brother. For now, he will help us." Emmett and Mario, who were already accustomed to the boss's stern mood, nodded affably. Trevor quickly found an approach to them. He started joking, asking how long they had been working, what their plans were. They regarded his interest as friendliness and soon began to communicate with him almost as equals. As the work progressed, Rick noticed every now and then that Trevor really knew how to talk to clients. Especially if someone came in panicked, Trevor managed to cheer up the person by saying a couple of routine but pleasant phrases. Rick understood that such a skill could sometimes be valuable. Not everyone likes stern and silent masters. "Okay, let's write it down," Rick said to his brother. "Boat, Starfish, owner Mr. Holmes, checking the bottom, repairing the engine. We'll start today, but the parts won't arrive until the day after tomorrow." "I wrote it down," Trevor answered energetically, clicking his pen. "Maybe I'll call this Holmes myself and calm him down, because you said yesterday he was nervous." "Okay," Rick nodded, hiding a slight smile. "Do so." By the end of the day, Trevor seemed to have settled into a rhythm of work. He was clearly pleased with himself, although tired. They drove home together, where Laura was waiting for them. At dinner, Trevor beamed. "Rick, you have a great team, and I really felt that I could be useful." "Yes, if you work and not just scratch your tongue," Rick muttered, but not maliciously. "I understand," Trevor answered seriously. "I'll try to live up to your expectations." Laura looked at them warmly, as if she hoped that the brothers had finally become closer. She asked Trevor about the details of the day, laughing when he recounted some funny incidents. Sometimes Rick noticed that his wife listened too closely to Trevor's every word, smiling a little more than usual. But he attributed this to the fact that Laura was always happy when there were at least some new impressions in the house. After all, Rick himself rarely shared his emotions. He was used to keeping them to himself. Trevor continued to be a friendly guest. He washed the dishes, offered help with cleaning, and told Laura various city stories that he learned on business trips and trips. And in the evening, when Rick put Carly to bed, he and Laura could hear quiet laughter from the kitchen. They seemed to really have a good time communicating together. Something stirred in Rick's soul, either jealousy or anger at himself for not being so talkative and easygoing in everyday life. But he decided that it was nothing. After all, Trevor is a brother, he is not an enemy. Maybe he really will learn easier from him and won't look askance all the time. "The only important thing is that there is benefit and no problems," Rick said to himself, going to bed, "and I hope Trevor doesn't stay long." However, even then he felt that the former peace in the house was imperceptibly changing its shade, and although he didn't know where this would lead, he still couldn't completely get rid of the vague anxiety. At first, Rick hardly noticed the changes. Life went on as usual, the workshop worked. Everything at home went on as usual. However, a few weeks after Trevor's arrival, small details began to emerge that haunted Rick. For example, in the morning Laura stopped calling her husband for breakfast, as she did before. He came into the kitchen himself and saw that Trevor was sitting at the table, telling something funny, and Laura was laughing quietly. When Rick appeared, both instantly fell silent. There seemed to be nothing reprehensible. They were just talking, but this sudden pause hurt the ears. In the evening, when Rick went to bed, Laura more and more often found an excuse to do a little more housework or check on Carly. She suddenly didn't fall asleep. Sometimes she would quietly say, "I'm so tired, just let me be alone," and go into the next room, supposedly to read a book or make notes in a diary. Rick tried not to press. He just asked, "Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" But Laura answered, "Everything is fine, really," while her smile was strained and her eyes were drowning in internal anxiety. Trevor himself behaved as usual. He joked, helped around the house, and willingly took on small tasks. If there was a need to buy groceries or take Carly to school, he was at the front of the line. Laura accepted this help with gratitude, but Rick felt pushed aside. After all, he was used to taking care of his family, but now he noticed that his younger brother does a lot for him. It seemed like a relief, but something here didn't coincide with his idea of family order. By the end of the second week, the tension was palpable. One evening, when Rick came home from work, he found Laura and Trevor in the backyard, where they were counting gardening tools. Laura was laughing, and Trevor was holding a stiff garden shovel in his hands and swinging it, as if imitating a medieval knight. "Look, Laura, I'm your weed protector," he shouted with a deliberately serious look. She couldn't help laughing. Seeing Rick, she immediately fell silent, straightened a lock of hair, and quickly began to collect her tools. Trevor turned around and smiled. "Hello, brother. I didn't know you were already home. Look, we want to put things in order in the barn." Rick glanced briefly at his wife, then at Trevor. "Well done. Just be careful with the shovel, otherwise you'll break the rest." Laura tried to look calm, but did not look up. Rick felt a vague jealousy. Wouldn't it be easier to leave such matters in the hands of workers, so that his brother would not shine too much in front of Laura? But it would be strange to drive Trevor away, because he really tried to help. That evening, when Carly was already asleep, Rick walked up to Laura and put his hand on her shoulder. "Maybe we can go for a walk along the coast, just like before. It's been a long time since we've been by the sea in the evening. It's so fresh there now." Laura thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay, go ahead. I'll take a windbreaker." They left, leaving Trevor at home. At first they walked in silence, listening to the sound of the surf and the cries of seagulls. The light from the lighthouse flickered in the distance, and the waves gently hugged the sand. Rick hoped that in this environment he would be able to understand what was going on in Laura's soul. "Is something bothering you?" he finally asked, stopping closer to the water. She shuddered, as if weighing whether to speak. "I'm just tired. From everything. I feel like I'm stuck in one place, living in circles. Home, child, you are constantly busy at work. And then there's Trevor with his problems. I don't know when he'll really get settled." Rick frowned. "I thought you were glad he was here. You guys get along, right?" Of course I don't mind. It's just." She looked at the dark surface of the water. "Sometimes I wish you and I could communicate more, do something together." "I understand. I'm trying. But it's busy at work right now. It's renovation season, clients are in a hurry, and I'm showing Trevor everything. He's doing a good job, by the way." "Yes, he's great," Laura said quietly. "You may not understand me, but I would like to get a little more attention from you. Not gifts or words, but at least some feelings." She fell silent, and Rick had no answer. He already thought that he was doing everything, providing for his family, trying to come early. But Laura, apparently, lacked emotional warmth. However, Rick could not say that he was ready to become different. He is who he is. They returned home in a state of fragile truce. But that night, when Rick held his wife close to him in bed, she pulled away slightly. "I'm sorry, I can't right now," she said, trying to be gentle, but inside she sounded internally tired. "I'm really tired. Let's do it tomorrow." Rick saw that she was not lying about some kind of physical fatigue, but he felt there was something deeper here. He just nodded and turned on his side, lost in his dark thoughts. The next day, the situation repeated itself, only it manifested itself in a different form. As Rick pulled up to the house, he heard Laura and Trevor laughing inside. When he opened the door, they immediately became silent. It seemed like they were discussing something personal. Laura looked embarrassed, and Trevor smiled cheerfully. "I heard a new joke, so I told Laura." Rick didn't say anything, but there was an unpleasant stabbing in his chest. Each time, it seemed to him more and more that some strange wall was appearing in the house, separating him from his wife. At the same time, there was no open hostility. Trevor behaved like a good-natured relative. Laura continued to do her usual things. But Rick felt that some kind of anxiety, or perhaps a secret, had settled inside her, and she did not want to share it with her husband. When Rick once again tried to show attention helping Laura cut vegetables, asking about her plans for the day, she answered briefly, often turning to the side and finding an excuse to go into another room. This whole cycle repeated itself day after day, and Rick slowly but inevitably became irritated. He believed that he deserved at least an honest conversation. However, asked directly, "Listen, Aren't you and Trevor too close? He didn't dare. Too straightforward, too rude, and what if he's wrong? Laura, it seems, has completely withdrawn into herself. Sometimes, when she heard Trevor talking on the phone with friends or making acquaintance with someone in a cafe, she would cast slightly admiring glances at him. Then Rick noticed how she tried to hide it, pretending that she was just casually looking in his direction. One evening, she and Rick finally started talking. The daughter was already asleep. Trevor went to see a friend and promised to return late. The house was quiet, only the trees rustled in the wind outside the windows. Laura, Rick began quietly, it seems to me that we are talking to each other less and less. What's happening? She was silent for a long time, then exhaled tiredly. I don't understand myself. There's just some kind of confusion inside me. It's probably not just because of Trevor or anything like that. I don't know what I want. When I look at us, I see that we live side by side, but there seems to be no emotion. Isn't it? Rick asked, trying to remain calm. I'm trying, really. Maybe I'm not so good at saying beautiful words, but I love you. She shuddered, as if hearing something unexpected, and hurried to give him a short kiss on the cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered. Give me some time. Rick sighed and nodded, although he understood perfectly well that he had no guarantees that this time would solve the problem. He felt that he could not hold his wife with his soul. She was accumulating a burden of understatement, and Trevor was always nearby, ready to give attention and light flirtation. So, gradually, the relationship began to take on an alarming aftertaste. Little things that previously seemed insignificant now became eloquent signals. Laura smiled more and more often in front of Trevor, but in passing she turned away from Rick. And in this tense air, something was brewing that Rick could neither articulate nor stop. Rick had never considered himself a person capable of prolonged outbursts of anger. His father, a silent veteran, taught his son from an early age, keep your face under any circumstances. If Rick were asked what truly deep resentment or real rage was, he would probably remember only a couple of times from his youth when he lost his temper and screamed. But even those moments happened a long time ago, and even then only slightly. Now, when he was faced with a scene for which no sane husband could have been prepared, his reaction was not like an explosion. Rather, it turned out to be a quiet, icy tornado, sucking in all emotions and leaving only a ringing emptiness. The day started as usual. Morning in the workshop, a couple of orders, it was necessary to ship parts for one client and settle invoices. Emmett and Mario, Rick's employees, were arguing over some gasket they couldn't find in a catalog. Rick shook his head and went to rummage through the stacks of papers himself. Everything is, in general, routine. The only minor concern was the thought, did I forget to sign the school document for Carly? After all, my daughter asked. Dad, don't forget, the director ordered it. Rick usually didn't delay with such things, but that day, busy with business, he suddenly remembered this document closer to lunch. Guys, he turned to Emmett and Mario, I'll go home, take one sheet, I need to sign it. I'll be back in an hour. Usually, Rick didn't leave during the middle of the workday, preferring to get everything done. But now I decided that it would be right to go for a ride and fill out the paperwork right away, so that after work there would be no rush. At the same time, you will be able to have lunch at home. Laura sometimes cooked for this time, especially if she knew that her husband might drop by. However, this time he did not call home in advance. There was little time, and his thoughts revolved around business. I got into my pickup truck, started the engine, and drove off. The road to the house took about 15 minutes along the coastal highway. The seagulls are not visible, the hot sun has driven them towards the water. Rick found himself having barely spoken to Laura for several days. After all the recent changes and strange behavior in her behavior, he was tense, but tried not to think about the worst. Could it get any worse? He asked himself a question. Maybe, but we have a family, a child. Everything will return to its place. When he turned into the house, the clock on the dashboard showed 10 to 1 in the afternoon. The closest neighbors are rare, almost everyone is at work. Ahead stood their own entrance, surrounded by greenery. There were no strangers' cars in the yard, and Rick didn't see Trevor's pickup truck either. This means that Trevor may also be on the road lately. He has been running around trying to find potential clients for the workshop in order to show Rick his usefulness. Parking in front of the porch, Rick turned off the engine. A slight breeze shook the curtains on the half-open window on the first floor. This window led to the kitchen, and Laura usually opened it when she was preparing dinner or ventilating the house. Everything looked ordinary, and only a quiet inner restlessness, which Rick at first could not give a name to, seemed to prick in his chest. He went up to the porch, inserted the key into the keyhole, and suddenly realized that the door was already ajar. Strange, Rick thought. Laura rarely left the door unlocked, especially when she was home alone. But maybe she went out into the garden and didn't close it completely. After all, anything can happen. Walking inside, Rick felt an incomprehensible silence. Not a sound. Even the TV didn't work, although Laura usually had the afternoon news on in the background. The house seemed somehow empty and at the same time, filled with ghostly tension. Rick called quietly. "Laura?" No answer. He walked along the corridor to the kitchen. The stove was cold, the dishes had not been washed, so she didn't have lunch or wasn't going to. Maybe she lay down in the bedroom, or did she leave and forget to close the door? And then something came from the depths of the house, muffled, blurry, but clearly human sounds. Rick shuddered and froze. His heart stabbed like a sharp needle. He instantly recognized the intonations of passion, choking breath, or a moan, or a whisper. From somewhere, apparently from the guest bedroom, or from the corridor leading to the rooms. My legs froze. For a moment, Rick thought he had imagined it. But then a woman's voice rang out a little more clearly, and it was Laura's voice with a weak strain, almost plaintive, but at the same time, overwhelmed by an ardent impulse. Another second, and through the ring of bloody nose in his ears, he caught a man's voice. "Oh my God," flashed through Rick's mind. But he already knew who this voice belonged to. I recognized it instantly and unmistakably. Trevor. Somewhere inside, everything collapsed. It felt as if a gigantic wave had risen and crashed over him, crushing the last crumbs of illusions. And yet his face remained cold, as it had been all his life. Only something was frozen inside, as if an icy void was closing in around him. Rick took a few steps, trying to breathe evenly, although his lungs did not obey him. He reached the room that had originally been assigned to Trevor and pushed open the door that was not tightly closed. The sight that greeted Rick was disconcertingly straightforward, without any ambiguous poses. Laura and Trevor had sex on the bed, the sheets crumpled. Trevor was on top, and Laura, throwing her head back, pressed herself against him, clutching his shoulders. And then, after a split second, they both noticed that the door was open. Trevor turned around, and horror instantly flashed in his eyes. Laura, seeing her husband, turned pale to a chalky shade and squeezed out some kind of strangled wheeze. Everything happened in short seconds, but for Rick, time seemed to stand still. He looked at his wife and brother as if he was looking through them without screaming, without hysterics. Everything inside was empty, leaving only icy, even breathing. He expected from himself, probably, an explosion of rage, or, conversely, a fit of pain, but nothing of the kind happened. There was a hollow emptiness in my ears. Rick. Laura tried to say something, frantically pushing away from Trevor and grabbing the sheet to cover herself. Trevor sat up on the bed, also trying to pull part of the blanket over himself, flushed all over, his hair disheveled, his breathing ragged. His lips parted. He wanted to say something justifying, but then he noticed the expression on Rick's face, heavy, frozen, without a hint of tears or violent indignation. "Damn," Trevor whispered. "Rick, wait, He stopped short. The room became so quiet that you could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Rick finally spoke, looking straight at his brother. "Get dressed and leave." Trevor swallowed and jumped out of bed, hastily pulling on his pants. Laura sat back on the pillow and covered herself with the sheet, as if this could protect her from realizing what had happened. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but she didn't even wipe them away. She looked lost. "Rick." she repeated, barely audible. He turned to her, his voice remaining as quiet and even as if it were a stranger. Get ready. Leave. She blinked. Where are we? I'm filing for divorce, Rick said calmly, as if putting an end to a business letter. If you need things, take them. I don't care, but get out of my house. At that moment, Trevor, finally pulling on his shirt, tried to speak more casually, as if trying to play out his usual role. Listen, brother, this all turned out. Well, we didn't plan it. It just happened, we were both. Rick didn't raise his voice, but every word sounded like a hammer blow. Go away, Trevor. Rick, don't do it right away. Let me explain. Now, Rick snapped, immediately. Trevor realized that there was no point in arguing. He picked up his things, which were lying right there on the floor, and rushed to the door, throwing a confused look at Laura. But she seemed unable to utter a word, pressed against the wall of the bed. Seeing that she was trembling and sobbing silently, Trevor tried to approach her, but Rick blocked the way with a biting movement of his hand. Don't you dare touch her. Trevor staggered back as if he had been hit. Then he hastily grabbed the rest of his things and literally ran out of the room. His rapid steps were heard along the corridor, and then the clang of the front door. He apparently rushed to the car, left somewhere around the bend, or went on foot. Rick didn't care. He was left alone with Laura. They looked at each other for a long time, she with eyes full of horror, tears and some kind of powerless plea, he with cold impenetrability, behind which feelings were seething like a hurricane, but none of them broke through. Rick remembered certain fragments, her smile when Trevor told jokes, her flushed cheeks when she tried to distance herself from Rick at night. And now everything has become terribly clear. Rick, please forgive me, she finally managed to whisper. I don't know how to explain this. It wasn't on purpose. He shook his head bitterly. Probably everything was not on purpose. Yes? Tears streamed down her face. She frantically tried to wrap herself more tightly in the sheet, trembling. Rick continued. I won't shout. I won't find out how long ago you started this or how many times. Simply know. You made your choice when you let him into your bed, and not only in bed, but also in the heart. Laura sobbed. No, I don't know how it all went so far. It all started with conversations. I felt that he understood me. I was so lonely, and he, yes. Rick felt an icy lump forming in his chest, and he was always his mother's favorite. And now, it turns out, yours too. She cried harder and bowed her head. I know it's a terrible mistake. I'm ready to do anything to get you back. Please give me a chance. I will make any deal, agree to any conditions. Even crawl on your knees, just don't do it. Don't kick me out. Rick's voice remained harsh and monotonous. I have already decided everything. You lied to me, cheated on me under my roof. I won't create performances, scandals, dramas. Such words seemed to send needles running down her back. I just don't need anything else. Neither your promises nor your tears. Nothing. Laura bit her lip and sobbed loudly. And Carly? Rick looked down. It was especially painful to think about my daughter. Carly was everything to him. For her, he lived, worked, looked for meaning in every new day. But now this pain only made him even tougher. Carly will stay with me. I will seek custody, and believe me, I will do everything so that the court takes into account the reasons. You will be able to see her. The law will decide that, not me. But you won't live here. Laura covered her face with her hands and sobbed hysterically. This thought that she could lose her daughter brought her to a state of panic. She tried to get out of bed, but the sheet slipped and she almost fell. Rick automatically leaned forward to grab it, but then he froze in place, literally forcing himself not to extend his hand. Laura sank back down onto the edge of the bed and dug her fingers into the rumpled sheets. Rick, she repeated in a trembling voice, I beg. No need. His words sounded as if from behind a glass partition. Don't beg me. Can't change anything. She tried to stabilize her breathing. Look. Yes, it's terrible. But Rick, she gulped for air, Can't we at least talk? No aggression, no public shame. Give me a chance to explain everything. He paled even more, if that was possible. Explain. What exactly? What did I do wrong for you to sleep with my brother at my house? You. She broke into tears and tried to answer, but the words were jumbled. I loved you always. You were just so distant. I lacked attention. I felt like a nobody. Trevor, I was wrong this. This won't happen again. Rick peered into her face, trying to understand whether there was sincere regret in these words or just fear of being kicked out. But even if she was sorry, it couldn't change anything. Go away, he repeated, softening his voice a little, but still evenly. Today, I'll call the lawyer. As if in a fog, Laura left the room and went to her and Rick's bedroom. With quiet sobs, she began to frantically pack her clothes into her bag, dropping things on the floor. I didn't have time to raise them when others immediately fell. Her hands were shaking so much that the zipper on her suitcase couldn't be fastened. It seemed that she was not so much getting ready as she was rushing about mindlessly. Feeling that the vocal connection between her and Rick might be interrupted forever, Laura, head to toe in chaos, ran back into the corridor, bumping into her husband, who was standing there, leaning against the wall and looking into emptiness. Hearing her steps, he mechanically raised his eyes, and there was not a drop of warmth in them. Is there really nothing we can do? She whispered, sobbing. For the sake of our daughter, for the sake of 12 years together. Rick answered without pause. There was something to hold back for before you destroyed it. Now don't try to hide behind Carly or our years. I won't yell at you or curse you, but I don't want to live with a person who betrayed me here in my home. He said betrayed, and she felt her heart squeezing and a dull pain in her temples. It was as if she had not realized the seriousness before, but now everything fell into place. There's no turning back. Laura made a last helpless movement to touch Rick's hand, but he pulled away, took a step back, then even raised his palm, making it clear, don't come closer. She wandered back to the bedroom and frantically took the most necessary cosmetics and some clothes. Everything else seemed like an extra burden her life, built on family, crumbled like ashes. A few minutes later, Laura came out of the bedroom with a small bag. Her eyes were red, her hair was matted. It was clear that her soul was torn with horror and shame. She walked towards the exit and stopped a few steps away. I'm sorry, was all she could squeeze out, and her voice broke into another sob. Rick answered dryly, I'll call you a taxi so you don't wander the streets. She nodded, weakly, almost mechanically. She wanted to say something else, but the words wouldn't come. He walked past her into the living room, picked up the phone, briefly dialed the local dispatch service and said, Good afternoon, send the car to 17 Rockport Lane, urgently. After hanging up the phone, he didn't even look at Laura. The taxi will be there in 5 to 10 minutes. She clutched the handle of her bag, afraid of fainting from nervous overstrain. I understood that there was no point in staying here any longer. Any next moment would only be more painful. And yet, how difficult it is to leave your own home, where you have lived for 12 years, where everything breathes memories. Can I get something for Carly? She whispered. Photo, maybe. Take what you want, Rick answered, still not looking at her. But do it quickly. She nodded, slipped into her daughter's room, and took from the table a small frame with a family photo. There were Laura, Rick, and very little Carly, who was only 2 years old in the photo. Then everyone smiled and seemed happy. A wave of bitter memories came flooding back. Tears, again and again, burned my throat, but now it was impossible to return to either time or the past. When Laura returned to the hallway, the taxi had already arrived, and a short horn sounded in the street. She stood at the threshold, looking back at Rick. He was still standing motionless in the depths of the corridor, as if the boundary between them had become insurmountable. She quietly lowered her head and walked out, closing the door behind her. Rick didn't move for several minutes, and only when the sound of a car driving away was heard outside, he exhaled convulsively and pressed his back against the wall. His throat became dry, as if he had run 10 kilometers without water. The pounding of my heart filled my ears. A strange struggle was going on in his soul. Part of him wanted to immediately rush after him, scream, blame, cry, curse everyone, but the other half, stronger, ordered him to maintain cold determination. After about 20 minutes, he finally moved. First, he removed the rumpled sheets from the room where he found them, not wanting Carly to see the mess and understand what had happened. Then he automatically checked whether the windows and the front door were closed. Walking into the kitchen, I looked at the clock, 2:30. A couple of hours ago, he was living his usual life, but now everything was divided into before and after. Putting the kettle on, Rick mechanically poured himself a cup, but could not drink. His throat was seized with spasms. Then he poured out the water and simply sat on the chair, clasping his fingers. He didn't remember how long he sat like that, maybe 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. An emptiness was spinning in my head. No detailed thoughts, only dull pain and the decision already voiced. I'm filing for divorce. When he stood up and looked in the mirror in the hallway, he hardly recognized himself. The face was pale, the eyes were dark. Just yesterday, he thought that the biggest problems in his life were Trevor's clumsiness and Laura's emotional detachment. Now he understood. This was just a hint of a thunderstorm that really broke out only today. Rick placed his hand on the phone and took a deep breath. We need to go back to the workshop and finish things. Then think about what to say to Carly. She must understand that her father will never leave her. He will have to explain why Laura will not return no matter how hard it is. He will not lie to his daughter. But for this, you need to gather strength. Rick dialed Emmett's number and said briefly, "I'll be late. Continue without me. If there are clients, go ahead and register." He collected his briefcase with documents and grabbed the car keys. As he walked through the hallway, his eye caught a framed photo of him, Laura, and baby Carly on the beach. A spontaneous shot of all three laughing, hugging each other against the backdrop of the ocean surf. Once upon a time, Rick believed that this was how the rest of his life would be with these two people next to him. Now the photograph seemed to burn. He looked away, walked out of the house, and carefully locked the door. Stepping onto the porch, I felt a strong wind blow from the sea, filled with the smell of salt and the promise of change. Rick squeezed the keys so that they cut painfully into his palm, but he didn't even notice this pain. Divorce turned out to be both simple and painful for Rick. Legally, everything was decided quite quickly. He hired a lawyer who drew up the necessary documents, taking into account the obvious facts of infidelity and Laura's statements that she did not intend to challenge the right to the house. Laura hardly resisted. Perhaps she felt too guilty or simply realized that she did not have the resources for a long lawsuit. As a result, the court decided to leave the house and custody of their daughter to Rick. Laura was allowed to see the child on a separate schedule, but this required a preliminary agreement. No permanent weekends or holidays with the mother were expected. The actual signing of the papers took place in court in a small room where only Rick, Laura, and their lawyers were present. Rick barely looked in her direction as the lawyer read out the terms. Laura looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't dare. When the court clerk handed them a pen and several sheets of divorce application, they signed everything quickly, without unnecessary emotions, as if they were performing a bureaucratic action. Inside Rick, every stroke of his hand was echoed with intense pain. He felt that some invisible rod in him was breaking in half. Never before had he thought that the official procedure could be so difficult. One thing is the decision to leave, when everything is in anger and pain, and another thing is the cold business part, where clear wording and seals complete all hopes for a future together. But Rick held his face as best he could and did not give himself free rein. He hid everything that was accumulating in his soul: rage, resentment, disappointment somewhere deep, leaving only a calm, slightly gloomy mask. After signing, Laura looked at him with a pleading look, as if asking, "What next? Can we talk some more?" But Rick, already flipping through a folder of papers, looked away. The lawyers left, and they were left alone for only a couple of minutes while they waited for the decision to be formalized. "How?" Laura began, but stopped short. Rick just chewed his lip and said briefly, I want Carly to grow up in peace, without scandals and unnecessary questions. We will decide meetings in the interests of the child." Laura nodded and said, "Yes, of course. I'll call you when I get settled. I would like to somehow, at least occasionally take her for the weekend, if possible." "We'll see," Rick answered quietly, "when you have housing and a more or less stable life." There was a pause, and Laura realized that the conversation was over. The assistant judge knocked on the door and said that it was time for them to move to another office. Rick left without looking up, and Laura, pausing for a second, looked after him with pain and despair. But she couldn't change anything anymore. After the trial, Rick's life seemed to take a new turn. On the one hand, part of his relatives turned away from him. Martha, his mother, took a hostile position. Perhaps it was more convenient for her to believe that Rick was to blame for everything. "He is too harsh. He did not give Laura any warmth. So what if Trevor did something bad? He's your brother, and you kicked him out, abandoned him to fate." That's what she said on the phone when Rick tried to explain the situation. In the end, their communication came to naught. Marta decided not to maintain any contact with him, since he self-confidently destroys everything and deprives her youngest son of shelter. Rick was hurt by this, even if he pretended not to care. His mother was always distant from him emotionally, but she still remained a mother. However, after the scandal with Trevor, she sided with the poor boy, and Rick was rude and heartless. So now Martha limited herself to sometimes visiting Carly at school or passing on gifts to her through friends, but did not talk directly to Rick. As for Trevor, he disappeared from the city almost immediately after the scandal. Maybe his mother allowed him to live in her house, or maybe he found another place. Rick didn't want to find out. He knew too well that his brother was a frivolous adventurer and did not expect repentance from him. Somewhere inside, there was still rage for the humiliation that Trevor inflicted on him, but Rick tried to extinguish it. "That's it. This man is nobody to me. Forget and move on." The only one he really tried to hold on to was Carly. At that time, the girl already understood that something had happened in the family. Her wariness and anxious glances showed. Dad became too silent, and Mom suddenly disappeared from home. But Rick, having closed himself off, said little. He tried to explain as best he could. "Mom left because she feels better now. But you can communicate with her if you want, just call or text her." He tried to say this in an even tone, not wanting his daughter to feel guilty or left out. "Dad," Carly asked, "will we now live just the two of us?" "Yes, for a while," Rick answered, avoiding false promises. "I will try to make you feel good. I will spend more time with you." "And Mom and I decided to live separately. But you can see her whenever you want, but I will need to know where you are going and with whom." "Fine." Carly nodded, trying to understand why this was happening. There were tears in her eyes, but she, like her father, tried to hold them back. Sometimes in the evening, the girl cried into her pillow. Rick heard muffled sobs outside the door of her room, but did not dare enter. He did not know how to console, except that he could quietly, carefully approach his daughter, hold her close, stroke her hair, and say, "Everything will be fine, I'm here." For him, these were unusual, almost unbearable moments, because he felt how everything inside him was burning with pain and powerlessness, and at the same time he needed to remain strong so that Carly could lean on him. The house, which previously seemed like a warm family nest, now has a shadow of emptiness. At night, Rick woke up and felt that no one was nearby in bed. He recalled those moments when Laura was still his wife and experienced a strange combination of bitterness and resentment. Sometimes I wanted to break something and scream, but he drowned out all these impulses within himself. "Can't you do it differently? Just hang in there." This is how he lived, day after day. In the morning, getting up, breakfast for Carly, getting ready for school, a short conversation, "Are you okay?" Then the workshop, in which he had to show redoubled determination in order not to let the business sag. At times, employees would ask, "How is your family, boss?" Then Rick waved it off. "Fine, don't bother with your questions." The guys understood that his situation was difficult, and they tried not to bother him. In the evening, Rick would pick up Carly, help her with her homework, and do some household chores with her. Sometimes they watched TV, but more often the girl went to her room and Rick was left alone. I was sitting on the couch, thinking about how quickly life had gone downhill, and yet I didn't allow myself to completely lose heart. I have to save my home, my business, my stability. Several months passed before Laura found the courage to ask to see her daughter. She called Rick and said that she had rented a modest apartment in a nearby area and was able to get a part-time job in a cafe. Her voice sounded quiet, embarrassed. "Do you mind if I see Carly? At least for a couple of hours," she asked. "I don't mind," Rick answered dryly. "Just make an agreement with her yourself. I won't interfere." "Thank you, Rick. I—" She wanted to add something, but he didn't let her continue. "You don't need to thank me. I'm doing this for my daughter." Later, when Laura came to their house for Carly, Rick opened the door, let her in, but did not invite her inside. He calmly waited until Carly got ready and saw them off in silence, only saying that, "I'm expecting the baby back at 7 in the evening." When Laura wanted to say, "Rick, maybe we can talk," he responded with a short shake of his head. His gaze was firm, but pain was hidden deep within. Carly returned on time, holding a toy and a bag of cookies. It was clear that she was glad to see her mother, but felt awkward, as if she was afraid that her father would be angry. Rick just asked, "Everything is fine." "Yes, Dad. We went to the park." He didn't find anything else, trying not to turn his daughter into a mediator. It seemed to him that it would be more honest. "There is a mother, there is a father, everyone loves you, and our job is to solve adult problems." But my soul remained heavy. Even when Carly hugged him and said, "I love you, Dad," Rick felt tears welling up in his throat. He had to close his eyes so that his daughter would not see his pain. Meanwhile, the relationship with Rick's mother, Martha, never improved. She kept in touch with Trevor, who sometimes appeared in the area, either looking for work or doing some real estate transactions. But Martha did not come to Rick. She conveyed short reproaches through mutual friends. "So how is he now? Happy that you destroyed your family?" Rick, having heard this once, only smiled bitterly. "It's as if I destroyed it myself," he thought. However, he did not consider it necessary to prove anything to anyone. If the mother decided to take the side of the offended younger son, so be it. Carly sometimes asked, "Dad, why doesn't Grandma come?" Rick gritted his teeth and replied, "Granny's busy, honey. Maybe later." He didn't want to go into details and didn't want his daughter to see how neglected everything was. It seemed wrong to drag a girl into family discord. Throughout this year, Laura, Rick's ex-wife, hardly showed up in her daughter's life. At first, in the first weeks after the divorce, she tried to see Carly several times. She came to the house, asked to spend a couple of hours with the girl, and took her to the park. Upon returning, Carly seemed confused, but did not cry, simply telling her father that Mom asks for forgiveness and hopes to make things right someday. Rick didn't answer this. He didn't want to drag the child into adult problems. He allowed the mother to see her daughter. He believed that the child has the right to know what maternal love is, even if it is clouded by the past. Rick himself remained cold towards Laura. He did not talk to her again, did not go far into discussing past grievances. However, after several such meetings, Laura suddenly disappeared. She stopped calling, didn't show up at the door, didn't write messages. The town was small, but Rick had not heard from anyone that Laura was trying to settle down somewhere. Neighbors, who had previously seen her in a cafe as a waitress, began to report that she had quit and gone somewhere. Nobody really knew the details. Carly, at first worried about her mother, asked her father, "Why doesn't Mom come? I write to her sometimes, but there is no answer." Rick could only shrug and answer carefully, "Maybe she's solving some problems now, but someday it will probably show up." Months passed, and Laura's phone was still silent. The pain of betrayal still resonated in Rick's heart, but he did not allow himself to think too long about where and how his ex-wife lived. All he could do was conclude, "She's probably ashamed and doesn't know how to rebuild her relationship with her daughter." Be that as it may, Laura was no longer part of their family, and Carly, although she missed her mother, gradually learned to live without her presence. She immersed herself in school life, dance classes, and new hobbies. The hardest times for Rick were the evenings when the house was silent. The daughter went to bed, and he was left with himself in the empty rooms where Laura's voice had once sounded, closet doors slammed, and the light clicking of her heels was heard. Now in the house there was neither her laughter, nor quarrels, nor even a timid attempt to have a heart-to-heart talk, which sometimes happened before. But despite this, Rick did not regret his decisions. He did what he considered the only right thing. Moreover, he now had two clear priorities, taking care of Carly and moving the business forward, and he firmly adhered to this course. The workshop developed. He hired another employee, expanded the range of services, and even purchased additional space for a warehouse for spare parts. Work began to bring not only a stable income, but also a sense of control over life. At night, as Rick fell asleep after a long day, he thought, the main thing is that Carly has everything she needs. I'll survive the rest. So everyday life dragged on. The sway of the surf, the noise of instruments, my daughter's school concerts, short conversations about business. But somewhere in the middle of the year, a new name entered Rick's life, Ashley. At first, it was just a work acquaintance. She came to their coastal town from inside the state, rented a small boat, and wanted to get it in order before the season. When he first saw Ashley in the workshop, Rick noted to himself only that she confidently understood what she wanted. I want to fix the steering wheel and update the hull, so that I can safely go out to the open sea. She was confident, but not boastful, and spoke in an even tone. In her gaze, there was a mixture of determination and a little fatigue like the one that happens to people who have gone through something serious and learned to move on. Rick talked with her briefly, looked over her boat, and made a preliminary estimate. Usually, he communicated with all clients clearly, without much emotion. But to his surprise, he realized that he was interested in talking a little more with Ashley, for example, to find out why a woman who, apparently, lives alone, needs her own boat, or how long has she been in town. However, he did not dare to ask personal questions and limited himself to the phrase, "Come tomorrow, we will discuss the details of the contract." The next day, Ashley arrived at the workshop just before work began, smiled at Rick, and handed him a thermos of coffee with the words, "I usually drink it by the shore at dawn. I decided to share since we will be working on my boat together." This detail, showing up early in the morning with hot coffee, immediately caused slight confusion in Rick. But he accepted the thermos, thanked us, and offered to go to his office, where they went over the renovation plans in detail. Thus began their first closer communication. At first, Rick did not realize that something was emerging between them that went beyond the client-professional framework. He simply noticed that Ashley came more often than required by contract, supposedly to monitor the progress of repairs, but in reality she began to ask questions about the city and local traditions. She asked where it was best to fish here or which restaurant would throw out the freshest catch. Rick answered briefly, sometimes recommending a couple of places. Then I began to notice that when he talked about the sea, boats, and service, Ashley's gaze was warm and focused. It's like she's not just listening to business information, but really wants to understand him as a person. Soon she began bringing biscuits or homemade cupcakes for the guys in the workshop, supposedly to please them while they worked on her boat. Emmett and Mario, Rick's co-workers, happily tucked into their baked goods and then winked at their boss, hinting, "She's definitely into you, boss." Rick winced in response, making it clear that he didn't notice anything like that. Deep down, he was embarrassed and did not understand whether he wanted to reciprocate this gesture. By that time, almost a year had passed since the divorce. Memories of treason and betrayal were too fresh. Rick sometimes thought, is it even worth starting a new relationship when you have not yet recovered from the old one? On the other hand, I'm not going to repeat the mistakes. He saw that Ashley was not intrusive, did not try to get into his personal space, but subtly and carefully expressed interest. And at some point he realized, communicating with her brings him calm joy, like warm light on a cloudy day. Rick took the first step towards a more personal acquaintance rather awkwardly. One evening, he lingered in the workshop, waiting for the paint on Ashley's boat to dry, and she herself came in to check if everything was going according to plan. It was already late, the workers had left, and Rick was alone conjuring the finishing touches. "I see you stayed here until night," Ashley said, walking inside. "It's not good to force a person to work so hard." "No, I voluntarily," Rick responded, smiling gloomily. "I want to finish it so you can pick up the boat by the weekend. I really don't want to rush you." She came closer and examined the shiny side panel. "But everything is working out great." Rick realized that he had nothing to talk about except paint, but the words were scrolling through my head. Ask her something else. And unexpectedly for himself, he suggested, "Ashley, you're probably hungry? It's already 10 o'clock in the evening. Maybe, maybe we should go to the corner diner. They serve good steaks there. I can. Well, I can treat you if you want." As he uttered this phrase, he felt like a teenager calling his classmate to a cafe for the first time. It had been a long time since he had taken any such steps. But Ashley smiled easily and somehow approvingly. "Sounds great. I'm just dying of hunger, and it will be great to chat." Thus began their first informal evening. They sat in a small diner that smelled of fried meat and onions, drinking cola and talking about the ocean, fishing and plans for the future. Ashley said that she used to live in another city in the state, divorced her husband 2 years ago, and moved here to start a new chapter closer to the sea, to nature. For Riku, her story was both close and distant at the same time. He also knew what the pain of a breakup was, but he was not used to sharing it with anyone else. When he carefully said, "I also got divorced a year ago, I have a daughter, we live together," Ashley nodded with an understanding look. "It must be hard for you. Family stories always leave scars." Rick just pursed his lips. He did not talk about treason, but Ashley apparently sensed his inner constraint and did not question him further. The conversation smoothly moved on to more neutral topics, but some kind of warm understanding had already arisen between them. After that evening, they began to see each other more often, not only because of the renovation. Rick once suggested, "Would you like to check out our local fishing pier? On Sundays, there are few tourists there, it's quiet." And Ashley agreed. Another time she called herself, "I heard that you have a cool fish market in your city from Dawn. Shall we go together?" So, step by step, their acquaintance took the form of small, friendly walks and private conversations. Rick soon realized that he was remembering Laura and her betrayal less and less. Of course, the pain has not yet completely disappeared, but a new feeling has appeared, the feeling that next to Ashley you can be yourself without fear of condemnation. He liked that she did not demand instant confessions from him, did not try to heal his emotional wounds, but was simply present nearby, showing sincere participation. It was a new and almost frightening experience. Carly also noticed that Dad began to sometimes stay outside the house, and that periodically they had a guest, a woman who either brought homemade cupcakes or helped with dinner. At first, the girl looked at Ashley with slight distrust, because after her mother's disappearance, she had withdrawn into herself, fearing to become attached to someone again. But Ashley turned out to be a tactful person and did not get into the child's soul. "I just asked one day, 'Carly, maybe you can help me make lemonade. They say you know how to mix juices really well.'" Carly cautiously went into the kitchen and began to show her how best to squeeze lemons without extra drops, because her grandmother taught her some culinary techniques. The end result was a delicious lemonade with a slight minty hint, and Carly said, smiling, "It seems like nothing happened." Like, "Great," Ashley praised and winked. "I think we can open our own bar in a couple of years. What do you think?" Such simple, playful communication without any baby talk helped Carly relax. Gradually, she began to perceive Ashley not as a strange adult, but as a person with whom she could talk about trifles. And Rick noticed this with relief. He didn't know how his daughter would react to the fact that Dad might have a new woman. But so far, everything has been going well. Rick did not immediately decide on this trip. He hadn't been to another city, where a friend named Steve had been calling him for a long time, for several years. Steve had invited him before, but somehow things didn't work out. Things to do in the workshop, worries about his daughter, and just a reluctance to change the usual environment. However, this time Rick felt that it was vital for him to break out of the routine circle, even if only for a couple of days, to unwind a little. Steve lived in a small but fairly lively town a few hours away. When Rick arrived, his friend greeted him cordially, waving from the porch of his one-story house. "Hello, old man. How did you get there?" "Everything is fine." "Okay," Rick nodded, getting out of the pickup. "The road is clear, so I rushed without traffic jams." "Well, come into the house. I cooked some meat on the grill. I have a beer in the fridge." It was a little unusual for Rick to once again plunge into the atmosphere of friendly gatherings, where business problems or caring for a child did not reach. He and Steve spent the entire evening chatting about old days and reminiscing about their shared adventures. Steve asked, "How is your workshop? Probably already expanded." "Yes, everything is fine." "Things are going slowly, there's plenty of work," Rick answered with restraint. "How is your daughter?" "Carly is fine. I go to school, enjoys dancing." Steve could tell from his tone that Rick didn't really want to go into details, especially if it came to his ex-wife. Therefore, I did not meticulously ask about personal matters. A couple of beers, some hot wings, a discussion of football, and the evening flew by. Closer to midnight, they went to their rooms, tired but happy. The next day, Steve had to go downtown on business. Rick decided that he would take a walk alone and explore the surroundings. He wanted to change the picture. After all, sometimes you are away from everyday life in your coastal village for so long that you begin to forget what other places look like. The area where Steve lived was located on the very outskirts of the town, surrounded by highways and warehouses, and a little further away there were gas stations, cheap motels, and the occasional restaurant. Rick walked along the highway, occasionally glancing at the signs: auto parts, tire service, cafe on the road, nothing particularly attractive. However, a few minutes later, he saw a small one-story building ahead with a bright neon sign that read Sunny Road Diner. "Looks like a classic roadside restaurant," Rick thought. He used to frequent these eateries on his way to other states when he was younger. He felt a little hungry and decided, why not stop by? The inside of the restaurant turned out to be quite cozy, although not that new. Glasses clinked, and there was a smell of fried potatoes and coffee. There were few visitors, a couple of truck drivers at one table, an elderly couple at another. An old country song was playing softly on the radio. Rick chose a table by the window so he could watch the cars crawl lazily along the highway. As soon as he managed to take off his jacket and put it on a chair, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure in a waitress's uniform heading towards him. The voice asked politely, "Welcome to Sunny Road. What will you order?" Rick looked up and was dumbfounded. Laura stood in front of him, his ex-wife, the one who disappeared from their lives almost a year ago and stopped coming even to their daughter. "Laura?" Rick's voice sounded harsher than he intended. She shuddered and dropped the small notebook. Her thin hands immediately trembled, and the girl hastily bent down to pick up her fallen hand. "Rick," Laura whispered, straightening up and turning pale. "You. How did you end up here?" Rick cleared his throat, trying to pull himself together. "I came to visit a friend. Steve lives here. I'm visiting him. And you. Do you work here?" She sighed nervously, glancing quickly around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Yes. I needed to earn money somehow. The restaurant is on the outskirts, the pay is reasonable, and there is inexpensive housing nearby." Rick didn't answer. He looked at Laura and noticed a sharp change in her appearance. She looked tired, haggard, and there were shadows under her eyes. Her figure seemed to have become a little thinner. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. The waitress's uniform fit awkwardly on her, clearly not the right size. It was clear that life was not spoiling her. Laura tried to continue, but fell silent, not knowing what to talk about. "Listen, There aren't many people here, so maybe I'll sit down. Rick nodded. Laura slid into the seat opposite, trying to stay carefully so as not to attract the attention of the owner of the establishment. Rick, she said quietly, I really didn't know you were coming. I didn't show up because... Because what? Rick interrupted her, trying not to raise his voice. Because you haven't even called your daughter in all this time. Laura bit her lip and lowered her eyes. I know. I'm ashamed. I understand that there is no excuse. It's just, after everything that happened, I couldn't go back to that city. I was terrible at looking people in the eye, and I didn't want to torment Carly with my strange visits. You understand, I offended her father and destroyed the family. Rick paused for a long time before answering. Carly is still waiting for you to come at least for a day, or you'll call, but she hasn't heard a word about you. Laura clenched her fists and her eyes filled with tears. I write letters to her, but I was afraid to send them. They are in my room. Every time I think that I don't have the courage. What will I tell her? Mom traded your family for a moment of weakness, and now she works as a waitress and cannot arrange her life. This is funny. I know you will never forgive me. Rick wanted to say, it's none of my business, but instead he asked, is Trevor with you? No, Laura shook her head. We broke up almost immediately when everything was revealed. He left, I don't even know where, probably returned to your mother. To be honest, I don't care. Rick, listening to this, felt a familiar emptiness inside. No outbursts of anger, only detached bitterness. He looked at Laura and suddenly realized that he no longer felt love, trepidation, or anger. Only a cold realization. This person, who was once dear to him, is now a stranger. I need to work to pay rent, Laura continued. The restaurant, of course, is not a dream, but here they pay the same rate plus good tips. I'm saving up to move closer to the city, maybe try teaching again, even though I was fired from school a long time ago. I see, Rick sighed. He leaned back in his chair, realizing that he had little time. The owner of the establishment might come up at any moment, or the visitors at the neighboring tables would decide to call the waitress. You could at least let me know where you are, so that Carly doesn't think that her mom is completely gone. I might show up. If you don't mind, Laura said, confused. Or not. I'll probably think about what's best. Rick felt a surge of irritation. Again, thinking about what's best, yeah, that's Laura's style. But he didn't say it out loud. He had long ago come to terms with the fact that it was pointless to rely on her determination. Instead, he looked at his watch. Okay, I have to go. I'm just passing through. He reached into his pocket and took out his wallet. Laura watched his movements with the same embarrassed expression that she had had throughout the conversation. Maybe you can at least order something, she timidly suggested. No, Rick said. I have no appetite. He took out several large bills and placed them on the table. The amount was much more than the cost of the possible order. Laura's eyes widened for a moment. Why so much? It's for tea, Rick answered calmly, looking straight ahead. Keep it for yourself. Rick, don't. I can't. Can. Consider this compensation for those months when it was hard for you, he muttered, but not sarcastically, but rather tiredly. I'm not asking for thanks, and I don't ask you to come back into our lives. Just, if you ever decide to see Carly, let me know in advance. He got up and put on his jacket. Laura looked up at him, her face distorted with tears. Thank you. I really... Goodbye, Laura. Without further ado, Rick turned around and headed out. When he pushed the glass door open, he paused for a second, as if he wanted to turn around. But he didn't. A cold wind from the highway flew into the room, slightly ruffling his hair, and a moment later he disappeared into the street. Laura remained sitting at the table. The restaurant was buzzing all around. Someone at the next table was calling for a waitress. Truck drivers were laughing loudly, and she tightly clutched in her hands several bills that Rick had left and looked out the window, where it was no longer possible to see his silhouette. Rick walked out into the parking lot and took a deep breath. He found his heart beating erratically and his palms sweating. This meeting turned out to be more difficult for him than he expected. But having overcome the confusion, he realized there was no former pain in his soul. There is no painful suffering as if he had lost everything again. Rather, there is an awareness. They have finally gone their separate ways. And oddly enough, it brought some relief. He got into the pickup truck and huddled in the seat, closing his eyes before starting the engine. Well, now I know where she is, he said quietly to himself. So what? The main thing is that Carly must be okay. A minute later, Rick pulled onto the highway and drove back to Steve's house, trying to push everything that had just happened out of his mind. There was one more day ahead in this city, and then a return to their normal life. To his daughter, to his work, to the people he trusts, and he firmly believed that the pain that once tore his soul apart was gradually being replaced by something calmer, more stable, even if with a bitter aftertaste of memories. Rick didn't expect to see Laura on his doorstep. That day turned out to be warm, his daughter was with a friend, and he and Ashley were dealing with urgent household matters. Nothing seemed to foretell any drama. But when the doorbell rang, Rick opened it and saw Laura clutching a small bag in her hands and looking at him with pleading eyes. She looked excited and confused. Either she didn't know how to start a conversation, or she was afraid that Rick wouldn't even let her into the door. And yet she started first. Hello, it was very difficult for me to decide, but I realized that I couldn't continue living without seeing Carly. I want to go back, seeing my daughter and you. Rick's heart sank for a second. More than a month has passed since he accidentally stumbled upon Laura in another city. She never showed up, except for a couple of short messages in which she discreetly asked about Carly. And suddenly, this unexpected appearance at the doorstep. Laura, Rick sighed heavily. Carly is not at home. She is with a friend. What does return mean? Laura bit her lip, embarrassed. I, I want to be in your life again. I miss my daughter, and she looked away. I understand that I made a lot of mistakes, but I dreamed that you and I could start over. Rick was about to open his mouth to answer, but then a woman's voice was heard from the depths of the house. Honey, are you coming soon? I put the kettle on, don't forget about. Ashley came out onto the porch, a light summer blouse, hair tied up in a bun, a face full of calm confidence and warmth. Seeing Laura at the door, she was noticeably surprised, but quickly pulled herself together and asked, Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had a guest. Laura's eyes widened, and she looked from Rick to Ashley in shock. From this whole picture, it was clear without words that Ashley felt absolutely natural and at home in the house, like a mistress. And what's more, she called Rick cute. What? Laura muttered, backing away on the porch. Are you with her now? She suddenly stepped back as if she had been burned and, turning sharply, rushed away along the path. Her bag almost fell to the ground. She picked it up as she ran. Laura, wait, Rick shouted. He glanced briefly at Ashley. She only slightly spread her arms, indicating, catch up, talk if necessary. And Rick, without hesitation, rushed after him. Laura flew across the yard and then ran out of the gate, heading to her car, which she parked a little further. Rick caught up with her literally a couple of steps, grabbed her wrist, trying not to cause pain. Laura, wait. She turned around, and in her eyes there was a mixed cocktail of emotions, confusion, resentment, jealousy, hidden hope that had just burst. Do you live with her now? She exclaimed, snatching her hand away. Yes, I'm with Ashley, Rick didn't prevaricate. And I don't just live, I propose to her. We'll get married soon. With these words, he looked into Laura's eyes for a moment, and she flinched as if from a blow. Her face turned pale, her lips trembled. So that's it. You have a new woman. Rick clenched his teeth tighter. His inner feelings were more complex than one could imagine. He understood that he had once loved this woman, but after everything that had happened, all that was left in his soul was a chill and a quiet sadness about the past. He said carefully but firmly, Laura, listen. I don't hold any grudge against you. There was a lot of pain, but I don't want to take revenge, much less forbid you anything. If you want to see your daughter, please, I don't mind. She needs her mom, no matter what. Laura squeezed the handle of her bag, looking somewhere to the side. Do you really mind if I com over to Carly's sometimes? I was afraid that you hated me. No, Rick answered, softening his tone a little. I don't mind. But to come back, to be with me, it won't happen. I already have my own life. And I'm sure Carly will want to see you if you stop disappearing. But our relationship with you is over. He said the last words without rage, only with quiet regret. Laura felt this well. He didn't want to hurt or give false hope. He just put an end to it. She took a deep breath, trying not to cry. I understood. Forgive me for barging in. I realized what I had lost. It's probably too late. It's too late, Rick confirmed. But not for my daughter. She's only 8. She still misses you, although she has already accepted that she lives with me. If you show up, I won't interfere. Just, I beg you, don't disappear again. Laura lowered her gaze and involuntarily looked at the wedding ring glistening on Rick's finger. In fact, he hasn't put on a ring, yet his engagement to Ashley was recent, and they will buy wedding rings closer to the ceremony. But on his left hand, he had a distinctive silver bracelet given to Ashley, and Laura apparently took it as a symbol of a new connection. Okay, she finally said, looking away. Carly is all I have left in this world, to be honest. Here you go. She'll be happy, I think, Rick said, letting go of her hand. I'll write you the address of the school and the schedule so that you don't come empty-handed. And if you want to call, you have my number. They stood silently on the street. Laura slouched, as if she had lost all the energy that had recently pushed her to take this desperate step to come and ask Rick to return her. He also felt squeezed. These few minutes completely unsettled him. So you are getting married, Laura repeated almost inaudibly. But I once thought that we would be together until old age. I thought so too, Rick shook his head, smiling bitterly, but life turned out differently. After these words, he turned and took a step towards the gate, making it clear that the conversation was over. Laura stood there for a moment, clutching her bag, then with a bitter grimace, she got into her car. The engine started, and she drove away, taking with her unspoken regrets and later repentance. Rick watched the retreating car, feeling painfully relieved. With her arrival, Laura seemed to try to open the door to the past, but fortunately, he had the strength not to open this door. Returning to the yard, he found Ashley on the porch. All this time, she did not interfere, she only watched the scene from afar. When Rick entered the canopy, she quietly asked, "Everything is fine. She won't make a scandal for you." Rick shook his head. "No, it seems there will be no more scandals. But she wants to see Carly." I agreed. Ashley came closer and put her hand on his shoulder. "I hope this will do the girls some good. After all, a mother is a special connection." "Yes," Rick agreed. "We need to give them a chance. Although, to be honest, I don't know if Laura can handle this responsibility this time. If she can't stand it, Carly will still know that Dad is always there," Ashley answered. "Now go home. The kettle has been boiling for a long time. I almost ran out of water there." She smiled softly, making it clear that she supported Rick and was ready for the open pages in his life. There was a quiet confidence in her voice. They would go through any difficulties together if necessary. Rick gratefully covered her hand with his hand. "Thank you, Ashley, for being here. It's different with you." "Of course," she said, pulling him into a short kiss. "We will be fine. And a wedding, and Carly, will handle everything." Rick nodded and felt the suppressed fears and anxieties clearing up inside him. He couldn't say that he had forgotten the past, but it had ceased to be an unbearable burden. 10 years flashed by like one short moment. Carly was already 18, and she was almost a head taller than her mother. Her hair was slightly ruffled by the sea wind, and the girl herself, standing on a deserted beach with Laura, looked at the swaying waves just as endless as they once were in childhood. Laura now worked in a neighboring city and periodically visited her daughter. They had a warmer relationship than then, during the terrible years of her disappearance. Today, they specially went to the sea, to the very place where fragmentary images of childhood came to life in Carly's memory, when her father and mother were still together. Beautiful, huh? Laura said quietly, leaning on the railing of a small observation deck. I have always loved this coast. It's strange how much time has passed. Carly nodded, looking into the distance. Everything seems so calm here. I want to believe that everything will be fine with us. There was silence for a moment. Laura didn't know how to get to the main topic, but she felt that this moment was long overdue. Finally, she took a deep breath. Carly, I made a big mistake 10 years ago. She betrayed your father, hurt both him and you, and this is the heaviest burden that I have carried on myself all my life. The daughter frowned slightly, but did not take her eyes off the sea. She had heard words of regret from her mother more than once, but she understood. Every time it was not easy for Laura. I know, Mom, but that's in the past. Dad is happy with Ashley, and soon they will have a son. We should all be happy for them, and I am. Well, it's true. Laura ran her hand along the branches hanging from the wooden canopy and looked at Carly with a sad smile. Are you glad? And I rejoice in my soul, and at the same time I experience envy and pain. After all, once I myself could be next to him with you, but now, everything is different. But I'm glad that they will have a child and that you will have a little brother. Maybe you will check on them. Carly nodded, looking her mother in the eye. Certainly. Dad invited me on vacation, and Ashley didn't mind at all. Ashley is a very kind person, Laura said. I know it wasn't always easy for her, but she gave your father something I apparently couldn't. The wind intensified, dark blue waves crashed onto the shore. For a moment, it seemed that all the old grievances and unresolved feelings were dissolving in this roar. Laura turned to her daughter, trying to smile through the elusive sadness. I'm happy that you grew up so strong and kind, and don't hold it against me. Carly timidly touched her mother's palm. I love you, Mom. It's just that we now have our own history, and it will no longer be the same. But we can make the best of what's left. Laura closed her eyes, and for a moment imagined what their future might have been like if she hadn't slipped up 10 years ago. But time cannot be turned back. But she could reconcile herself and try not to lose what was still in her hands. Her daughter's love and rare, but still warm meetings. They continued to look at the sea. The waves rushed towards the shore, breaking in the salty foam. It seemed that every peal contained a quiet whisper. There will be a new day, new chapter. And Laura felt that now, after many years, she was ready to accept this life as it was, and finally try to forgive herself. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.